So this is part C of the Kudilar television channel being broadcast only on the internet, online from London, within quotation marks, UK, on Wednesday the 12th of May 2021. And this fortnight's, the latest edition of the fortnightly, this one, and they've got a picture, they've got a bubble there, Starmer taking injection, and he's saying as he's given the injection, are there any unpleasant side effects, he says. And the person administering the injection is shown as saying, you will be out of power for years. Now, this is the private lie which is getting worse. It's banal and stupid. It doesn't say that he should be prosecuted. That is the thing that he should be shown as saying in this so-called satire. He should be shown in the bubble, in there, that instead of him being told that he would be out of power for years, he should be made to say that, am I going to be facing all the charges or something, and he should be told that he will be prosecuted in full. And there is an admission in the Boris Johnson live, Prime Minister's Question Time live on Facebook. There's an admission there about Boris Johnson. And he's shown as saying, it doesn't matter. I can get away with anything. I can even declare war on Johnny Frog on the day before the election. Hop of President Napoleon Macron party and your garlic-breathed trawlerman is Admiral Horatio Hornblower Nelson Bozza to the rescue. It's Trafalgar all over again. Kiss me, Nanny, I mean Carrie. Now this is the kind of almost accurate description. We said all of that. And more straightforwardly, we said that the whole Jersey gunboats thing was completely timed to get the attention of the zombies and the gullibles. And who did deliver? The zombie kind of compliant words for the congenital liar. Amazing, isn't it, that the former ambassador to Britain, was the one who called Boris Johnson a congenital liar. And then he managed to confound even that description by confecting an entirely new, brazen set of lies about Jersey. So even after being condemned as a congenital liar, the congenital liar manages to lie ever more. Now here in the Rotten Boroughs kind of page, there is a column about the crooks in Croydon Council. And the crooks in Croydon Council have managed. I mean, how do they? It's not just Boris Johnson who behaves as if he has impunity and is allowed to behave as if he's got impunity. The depth of and the spread of corruption in councils is staggering. This Catherine Carswell, she is now chief executive at Croydon, the Crooks Council. Of course, she is an interim. Now, she is the serial interim chief executive, this Catherine Carswell. The very fact that she even manages to be interim anything shows that there is no accountability, there is no honesty, there is no responsibility, nothing. I mean, one of the most crooked local councils, Croydon, has got one of the most dishonest and opportunistic serial interim chief executive appointee, Catherine Carswell. And she has been hiding the fact and hiding the truth, suppressing the truth about Croydon's massive corruption and criminality. But the fact that she is featured in this piece in the Private Lie, dated the 14th of May, that is just 10 days, 8 days since the so-called referendum in Newham, where the liars managed to concoct a kind of stage the bogus referendum, and they said that the voters have voted to retain the mayor system. It's there that Carswell was appointed interim chief executive by Roxana Fiaz in 2018. We shall be giving a longer description of Catherine Carswell and why she embodies the corruption of local councils in England. And there doesn't seem to be any real follow-up in Private Lie to the criminality of David Cameron. And of course, the item that is doing the rounds on the online news outlets today is most likely kind of sourced from the private lie, this first one, flat broke, that Boris Johnson has been sent a county court bill. Because the Register of County Court Judgments, CCJs, has recorded a case number 161M C959. The amount awarded against Boris Johnson is £535. And the name of the person against whom the county court judgment is entered is Boris Johnson, and the address is 10 Downing Street. So the private lie is saying that could the first post-lockdown visitors to number 10 be the bailiffs? Last October, around the time fortunes were being found for his flat refurbishment, County Court issued a judgment against Boris Johnson for an unpaid debt of £535. The eye can reveal. Most prime ministers might be pretty embarrassed to see 10 Downing Street on the Register of County Court Judgments. But the record shows the debt still unsatisfied more than 6 months on. The nature of the unpaid debt and creditor are unknown, but as anyone who is forgotten to pay a bill knows, plenty of warnings come before the courts get involved, even by Johnsonian standards of mismanagement. This doesn't look good, as the government itself warns about county court judgments on this website. Banks and loan companies use this information to decide whether to give you credit or loans. Just as well, benefactors can be repaid in other ways when you are prime minister. And there are other items, but the essential point we make about the role that Ian Pissoff is making private lie play, it is not critical at all. This is completely cancelled out by the stupid remark there, without giving the list of Johnson's crimes and offences and the incidents of law breaking and criminality in a career over 30 years. And it's a joke. It's a joke in effect, not joke in fact. And the BBC treated this information by diverting attention from the gravity of Johnson's kind of illegality, law breaking, flouting of the law, and dishonesty, by running an item online about what does CC, County Court Judgment, stand for and what is the implication. That's not what the BBC should be saying. The BBC should be saying that this is a first in the history of 10 Downing Street. And it should be something that should be used and added to the list of kind of misconduct and criminality and negligence. Because although the county court judgment itself is not in the category of crime, but all the surrounding behavior by Johnson shows that crime has been committed as well, because that must be the actual judgment must have been entered after the as the procedure is after the letters and demands were ignored by Johnson, and whoever decided to ignore these court or creditors' demands must have done so by behaving in a way that constituted crime as well, because lying and denying must have been included in their behavior before the county court judgment was entered. We said earlier about the item in the Financial Times. Let's go back to the item that was yesterday, the London Libel and Reputation Management. We said we shall go into more of that. Now look at this. This is county court is a court. And Johnson is neglecting the county court. And he is the one who is named as the debtor, as the person who owes money to somebody. So that shows that the actual operation of the court system, we have been saying that the court system is within quotation marks as well, because it's not a fit for purpose system. So the court bureaucracy, it doesn't work. It's not competent itself. Because what kind of court is it that actually enters that kind of judgment against Boris Johnson without making that public and making that action as illustration of Johnson's defiance of the rule of law and the Constitution and all the other things? It is not somebody who is unknown or the address an obscure one. It's the most widely cited address in all of this country, number 10 Downing Street. And it is the official headquarters of the Prime Minister of the country at the time. So there is nothing in the legal court system bureaucracy that actually looks at the behavior of the people, including the likes of Johnson, in the context of the duties that they owe to the country. I mean, if you can't even pay a £550 bill, it shows that he's not fit for purpose, because there is no shortage of money in the government, and there is no shortage of money in terms of people being available to pay him money, donate money at the as this whole refurbishment bill has been about. So he is behaving worse. He is behaving worse than the worst unfit person. And he is the Prime Minister. So what can be said about the judgment, about all the increased powers for the police to stop and fascistly impose fascist bans on demonstrations and protests? I mean, who devised that? And how fit is Johnson to judge whether there is a need for increasing powers to be given to the police? Well, the police are increasingly being exposed as a force or as a number of forces, as having abolished most of the crimes and most of the duties that they used to have before, without any evidence of the police powers being examined by Parliament thoroughly, or whether the Parliament has had any say whatsoever before the police started behaving illegally. There are dozens of areas of policing that are unfit for purpose. So instead of looking at that unfit for purpose policing and repairing those, Johnson is making the policing more unfit for purpose. And he is unfit. I mean, it is the kind of thing that is evident and represented and is typified by this bill, bailiff's kind of bill, the county court judgment, is more incredible and more fantastic than would be the contents of a fiction, a work of fiction or works of fiction. And he's incredible in that all of these evidence of all ranging from this bill to thousands of pounds and the circular route or routes used to hide the actual source or sources of the donation, which money he abused. I mean, there are more extensive evidence of incompetence and negligence and unfitness than can be found in any book of fiction. I'm aware that the English literature, the category of English literature, let's say of the last 100 years, has included a small number of English authors consistently as being popular and popularly promoted by the promoters of the curriculum and syllabus, whatever. And they include, of course, Charles Dickens. They've included Charles Dickens because Dickens has been described as a socially kind of concerned and socially relevant writer, commentator, that is. And the other is, of course, Eric Blair, also known as George Orwell. But reading both of those authors and examining their kind of relevance or examining the link in their texts and in their narratives and in their scripts to the reality of society that they were and they are credited as having depicted, it is clear that they didn't really tell the truth. Charlie Chaplin is different. But Dickens didn't tell the truth in the same way I said in part 2 about the report in the Independent online by May Bullman, dated the 13th of November 2018, about the meeting that was attended by the then visiting United Nations Rapporteur or Envoy on Poverty, the Australian-born racist Philip Alston. And I said that Philip Alston, when he finally published his report about Britain, a few months later, he lied. And despite the fact that he himself lied and understated the individual and institutional corruption at every level of the UK, local councils, other agencies, and in Parliament, he underplayed. He didn't criticize the British agencies and institutions sufficiently rigorously, anywhere near rigorously, let alone truthfully. So he didn't actually deserve to be condemned from a perspective of his belonging to the same mentality and mindset as the conservative, as the right wing, and the bourgeois, likes of the Guardian or the Independent. May Bullman, for example, as I said in the part B, that May Bullman's piece, full of evidence of trying to make pretexts, make excuses for the cruelty of Neom Council employees and Neom Council's regime. So May Bullman herself was colluding with an agenda of giving any excuse, finding any excuse, looking for any excuse to excuse the crooks in Neom Council, the liars in Neom Council. So Philip Alston, when he wrote or authored his final report about the UK, he was accommodating of the UK institutions. And he, Philip Alston, being the appointee of the United Nations Secretary General, should have known, and being the kind of law academic or legal academic at the New York University, it would have been justifiably expected of him to be familiar with the various founding aims and purposes of the United Nations, one of which has been followed up by other declarations, international treaties, etc., especially by the European Convention of Human Rights, ECHR, which has been replaced in name, but in terms of the name, it has been replaced, but its contents remain unchanged. And they are actually derived from the founding declaration of the United Nations. Founding declarations of the United Nations are very important in terms of international kind of relationship among states and amongst people. But the United Nations is actually, well, it operates as an association of nations. That is to say, nation states, not nations like the ancient nations of North America, all these people that are broadly called American Indians. Those nations have been obliterated by genocide done by the Spanish, the British, the English, who massacred and raped and plundered all these places and countries that are now part of the United States of America and Canada. Those nations are not represented in the United Nations. Despite that limitation, the United Nations founding declarations are unique instruments, that is to say, documents of international relationship that have been very rare in international relations, indeed, up to and until the foundation of the United Nations organization. For that reason, I have always believed that despite the comparative quality and content of the founding declarations of the United Nations organization, which start by saying that the inspiration, the motivation for the founding of the United Nations was to avoid anything like the wars that had just happened, wars caused by the Nazis. So, on many key kind of grounds and criteria, the United Nations declarations are very significant in the history of humanity. Rarely had there been anything like that on an international scale that the United Nations Foundation or the founding of the United Nations actually represents. So this is something that should have been really on a day-to-day basis treasured and treated with respect and real compliance for the sake of humanity, for the sake of peace on the planet. This hasn't been done, and the fact that it hasn't been done is evident in the continuing wars that are being waged by the members of the Security Council. For example, when Tony Blair colluded with George W. Bush, both the countries they represented or abused in their representation, in the attack on the Afghan people, on the Iraqi people, they were violating United Nations declarations. So when the actual evidence is looked at about the extent of poverty, the extent of deprivation, extent of lack of access available to the most vulnerable people, people in the most kind of low income category in the UK, it can be seen that they are being pushed into those positions, kept into those positions by agencies and individual decision makers in the UK, breaking the requirements contained in those United Nations founding declarations and associated other similar declarations, including the Human Rights Charter or conventions. But Allstone produced a stupid, ignorant report for a law professor. He didn't actually explain or relate to the facts by following the framework that had already existed and was contained in the founding declarations of the United Nations. Why am I saying that? Because that is the due process, if you like. That is the way to deal with any issues. If there are declarations, if there are kind of contents of the declarations that are subscribed to by a signatory country, what is called high contracting parties, it's a mouthful of an over-exaggerated kind of bourgeois description of a member state. Now, the United Nations founding declarations require the signatory country, UK or any other country, to uphold in that country's state's policies and behavior and conduct towards its own citizens and people living within its borders and boundaries. That country has to uphold the rights of the individuals that are referred to and enshrined in the declarations of the United Nations, which declarations are accepted and subscribed to by the signatory state, any state. United Kingdom, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, United States, Canada, any of the North American countries, the continent there. So Philip Allstone should have examined chapter and verse how the United Kingdom's institutions were failing, number one, and or if they were not failing, they were intentionally doing that. So it was not a failure. it was a negligence, it was an intended act of criminality. Because the definition of criminality, the term criminality and the concept of criminality is very frequently used in this broadcast. That is to say, on this channel and in a series of broadcasts. Not because we are indifferent to inappropriate use of any word or language, but because on the facts, full stop, on the facts and nothing but the facts, the most appropriate description of the individuals and perpetrators is as criminals. Think about that. So there is a preponderance, there is a frequency, high frequency of criminality going on in this country. And Philip Alston failed and neglected both sides of the criminal content to recognize and expressly refer to the negligence and the failures and the contemptuous attitude shown to the obligations that are imposed by the various declarations signed by the UK. And the majority of the poverty, low income, lack of housing, lack of jobs and discrimination, lack of access to due process and the due process based remedies to be provided by the legal system, so called. All of these can be kind of linked, bullet point or numerically, and analytically and evidentially, item by item, can be correlatively connected with the UK agencies, individuals, institutions, government, parliament being in violation, in breach of all the requirements. Think about that. All the requirements that they're legally under, and the requirements that are contained in all these relevant declarations and charters and conventions and agreements and statements that the UK has been signing now. I checked with the relevant resources, archives, and the UK government's archive that contains international treaties, the copies of the international treaties and charters, etc. And it says literally thousands of separate documents and instruments are contained in the archives. Think about that. Thousands, not thousands of words, but thousands of separate instruments, charters, declarations, agreements, conventions are contained in the archives, which are based on the United Kingdom signing all these thousands and thousands and thousands of archived items. Which means that creating poverty and discrimination and deprivation in the UK at any level is against the law. And all these agreements are part of the law, part of the constitution. Now, to those who may say that, well, there is no written constitution in Britain, of course that is true. But that only refers to an obsolete, outdated definition of Britain in the context of having a constitution, written constitution or not. Because there is more than enough written materials that are contained in what is treated as constitution. All these treaties and the various other instruments and documents, including the various domestic, that is within UK Parliament, domestic acts of Parliament. What there isn't is a written code governing some of the behavior. So that is replaced or substituted in effect by the availability and existence of what is called conventions, domestic constitutional conventions and behavior within the UK. Now, conventions, because they're not written as codes, create disputes and disagreements about whether a particular convention asserted as a convention by one party is a convention in exactly the same way as seen by the other party. Therefore, there were two major challenges through the Supreme Court about Brexit. That is because there is no constitution, a written constitution. But then, as the proceedings took place, it was made very clear that despite the fact that there was no written code of conduct in terms of constitutionality, there were enough precedents, recorded evidence of the previous decisions in the particular field, that is called precedents. And precedents is related to precede, that is previous to the particular time, temporal point when the decision is made. So a lot of the contents of the proceedings before the Supreme Court about the two Brexit challenges showed that although there was no written constitution, there was enough written materials that can be and have been treated as being part of the written constitution or the practical constitution in action. So when I'm still talking about the United Nations rapporteur, Philip Alston, remember, so this whole discussion should be seen as a very wide-ranging evidential discussion and analysis of the failures and failings of all the segments and all the components in the issue that we are discussing, issue of the poverty and deprivation and homelessness and hunger in Britain, as reported by the particular expert appointed by the Secretary General of the United Nations. This particular expert was the Australian-born and racist Philip Alston, whose main latest appointments have included being in the Faculty of Law at the University of New York in America. Now, being a law professor, law academic, I mean, it's the simplest of assumptions, would have meant that he should have been aware of what I have just summarized about the context and the application of the United Nations. But he showed no such awareness. So if he is a professor at the university, professor of law at the University of New York, what does that make me? That I have been representing wider and deeper and more up-to-date analysis of the law and the legal scope than he ever came anywhere near to even showing awareness of. Why am I saying this? Because every issue like the poverty and hunger and deprivation that exist in Britain at various stages, put together as an issue, but it has got various parts, can be explained. Social issues can be explained by examining the behavior of the main decision makers. What I'm saying is that it is possible to end a wrong kind of tendency or a wrongness in the culture of a country or a society by applying all these options, solutions that are contained in the declarations and charters and conventions and agreements. So, what Philip Alston did, he did publish a report, but he didn't provide the solution. And the reason why he didn't provide the solution is because he culturally belongs to the dominant Anglo-Saxon origin people who are in control of the power in Britain at various stages. And this is despite the fact that the likes of Roxana Fayaz are not members of the Anglo-Saxon ethnicity. And that is because, although she is in post as the elected mayor, Roxana Fayaz is a mental slave and a stooge who doesn't know these things, the things that I have actually explained and updated on. And it is obvious, since she became installed in the post as mayor in the name of, at the expense of the people of Niwam, in May, this is the month of May 2018, so 18, 19, 20, 21, this is the third year. Since she became installed in that post, Roxana Fayaz has been increasingly or has been behaving with increasing dishonesty and corruption and criminality. So when Philip Alston, the United Nations Secretary General's envoy on poverty and hunger and homelessness and so on, submitted his report of these issues and these problems in Britain, he should have examined the role, the mentality, the background, the context of there being a mayor and what the remits of the elected mayor was, but he didn't. And I have said often, and I'll say it again now, I mean, Philip Alston is not unlike a kind of British politician. So he may know of wrongs in the system, in the institutions, but he may refuse to share that knowledge publicly. Because if he shared that knowledge publicly, then he would lose the positive rapport and relationship with his fellow power holders, let's say. Although he's not in power in Britain in that sense, he is part of the support structure for those in power. Support structure is intended by me to mean that an audit, he was like doing an audit. And his report is treated as a kind of clearing of his kind of subject, let's say the UK government, UK state, being cleared of any wrongdoing, innocent. And that is a structural endorsement, intellectually, of course. So that's what he was doing. As they say, Alston wasn't there doing the inquiry and publishing the report to rock the boat. He wanted the unjust, unfair, corrupt, and in the context of much of deprivation and poverty and lack of income and low income in Britain, racist colleagues. So most of the response to Alston's report on the United Kingdom were not hostile because he didn't actually tell the truth. So those who commented found that he didn't actually expose them truthfully to the wrath, to the anger of the victims and anger of the campaigners for justice. So he was one of them. That is how they mostly saw him. And most typical of all of them is The Guardian, which has published several items about Alston's visit to the UK approvingly. And as I said, this is world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. When I say that, I include, of course, as I have been showing, my personnel roles at relevant times with various participants in Fleet Street and agents of Fleet Street and agents of government, etc. So this Mae Bullman has maintained her silence. When she published that report on the 13th of November 2018, after that report, I contacted her and I gave her information about poverty, hunger, etc. in detail. So if she were herself motivated by any willingness or intention to do something to end poverty and hunger and deprivation and cruelty by the local council, she would have responded. And she would have thanked me for drawing these to her attention. Because what I drew her to her attention was far more comprehensive and far more original than any, and I repeat, any of her colleagues, either on The Guardian or The Independent or anywhere else in Fleet Street, would have been able to give her, provide her. Because what I gave her was the result of my findings and my extensive studies and investigation into the causes of how poverty and hunger are created and maintained in Britain. She never replied. It wasn't because she didn't receive them. As I said about my questions being very central and focused, and most of the people who are dishonest don't want to engage in answering because they can't answer. Because if they answer, then they will know that they will be asked another question which will not be something that they can actually truthfully, honestly answer. And Mae Bullman, being the social affairs correspondent or editor at the Independent at the time, her relationship with the likes of local councils is more important to her than her engaging with me in examining the evidence. Because examining the evidence from my evidential international objective criteria and standpoints would necessarily force her to concede, accept, admit that the councils were doing wrong. That she couldn't do because she would then be identified as on the other side, as being on the other side of the local councils, the corrupt councils. That is the reason why she didn't want to engage. She knew that what I was saying was absolutely true. Not just her. I mean, I have communicated in the last few years since Fiaz was installed in the post of elected mayor in Newham at the expense of Newham. I'm communicating with Archant. Archant is the company that owns the local papers across East London. Both the Tower Hamlets based or Tower Hamlets related East London idiotizer, I call it. Original name was advertiser, but I changed it about 20 years ago because of its stupidity and the contents being so idiotic. So the East London idiotizer, the Neom Recorder, and other titles and other kind of so-called commercial, independent, quote, local newspapers. And I have found that increasingly in the last 5, 6, 7 years, these titles have dropped publishing anything, even a pretend kind of level of reporting the truth about the corruption that goes on within each of the council, like Tower Hamlets and Neom, for example, in this context of our particular discussion. And as I said, on the 14th of March 2018, when I confronted Robin Wales on air, on a live program on a satellite channel, Wales did not succeed in putting himself forward to the viewers as a Democrat, as an accountable person, as an honest person. I exposed him. I didn't expose him personally, or I didn't expose him by being myself motivated against him on a personal level. I wasn't. I'm never motivated on a personal level when I address the actual issues. And Robin Wales lied, as I have said in the last 24 hours as well, about that particular encounter. And I have said that Ruxana Fiaz has been lying with increasing frequency since she became installed in that post. It's not my agenda to refer to Roxana Fayaz as a liar or as a crook and a kind of stooge, as a spy of the UK state, as the prevent agenda kind of organizers in the government fronted by Bill Ayer and Gordon Brown later. They recruited her as an agent, as a spy, as one of the 18 Muslim women that were recruited to act as spies on Muslim women in Britain. So Ruxana Fayaz was launched by the UK government, UK state, as an agent, as a spy. So that spy has now been foisted on the people of Neom as the elected mayor. There is no way that a person who owes her political kind of legitimacy or political abilities and fitness to serve the democratic duty, she cannot be democratic, and she cannot be independent of the state, and she cannot therefore be relied on to support any agenda, any program that helps the ordinary people. And most certainly, she cannot be expected to do anything to harm or hurt her. What is the word in the vocabulary of spying? Her handlers, people in the state machine that control the operation of the various spies and agents. So Ruxana Fiaz is an agent of the British state. She was an agent long before she became a candidate to replace Robin Wales. So when she apologized at that meeting on the 12th of November 2018 and witnessed by Philip Alston and reported on the 13th of November 2018 by May Bullman in the Independent Online. She did that within the safety of being left alone by Alston on the one hand and the media, Fleet Street on the other. Because when she was launched as a possible replacement as a Labour Party candidate for the post of the elected mayor at the expense of the people of Newham, she was promoted by the Guardian, the Independent, and others of their ilk with the kind of hype that she didn't deserve based on the evidence of her record as a person related to the council. She had no record. She didn't have a record and she didn't have any kind of background. As I said, her being a spy is not a background in democracy. It's a background against democracy. So when Philip Alston agreed to hold the meeting or attend a meeting in Newham, he must have known enough about Rukhsana affairs to feel confident and comfortable in attending. So there is no criticism of her or her likes in his final report about the UK. And in that omission or leaving any reference to the role of the mayor and the corruption of the council, Philip Alston, although he was supposedly publishing a report about poverty, he was not doing anything against poverty, because the poverty is created by the likes of Fias and the likes of Wales, the likes of other elected mayors and elected councillors and their full-time employees in place. That is, in addition to that, Philip Alston didn't talk about the court system, the court bureaucracies. Now, I have spent more time, so far I've spent much more time in studying laws. And I have spent more time in challenging legal status quos. So therefore, my experience, my record are based on practicing legal advocacy over many decades and in settings, in situations that are very widespread and diverse. That is to say, I have done this within court systems and I have done this outside of the court systems. But the main theme has been following. Following meaning studying, examining, not following like going after without questioning, but analyzing, examining the contents of the laws and their relevance and their impact and the role of the people who make the decisions. People who make the decisions to deprive somebody of their rights, deprive somebody of their entitlements, somebody of their freedoms, somebody of their right to have their say. I've been doing this for a very long time, much longer than anyone else, including Philip Alston. Of course, Philip Alston, in comparison, is not a very substantial figure because of what he has done and what that shows about his limitation and his capacity. I've dealt with people who are more experienced than him, including, as I said, I've dealt with and I've diagnosed people of the type represented by Neuberger, who has been president of the Supreme Court. And I've diagnosed him out of existence, if you like. I've exposed the president, former president of the Supreme Court, as another liar. Okay, so when Philip Alston published that stupid report, which wasn't critical of the UK really, as I have just explained in the last hour, the person in post at the time, just installed in that post at the time, was Amber Rudd. Amber Rudd had been Home Secretary. Before that, when Theresa May became Prime Minister, Theresa May appointed Amber Rudd as the next Home Secretary. But soon after Amber Rudd became Home Secretary, she got herself involved in a scandal. She was caught lying to a committee of members of Parliament about the treatment by Britain of the group of people that are referred to as the Windrush generation. Windrush is the name of a sheep. Empire Windrush is the name of a sheep which was used by Jamaican immigrants to travel to the UK, landing at the port called Tilbury in Essex. So they are known as the Windrush generation. And when the MPs committee was questioning the Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, about the contents of a report published in The Guardian about the Windrush generation people being abused by the Home Office in Britain, she made dishonest, inaccurate response, which were then shown to have been dishonest and misleading. On that basis, and because of the heat of the controversy created by the findings in the report published in The Guardian, she was immediately after that forced to resign. And she was not a member of the cabinet for a while, until Esther McBee, who is a right-wing reactionary conservative, who was appointed Secretary of State for the DWP, which is the department that I have named deprivation, want, and poverty creation, which is what the DWP does. It shouldn't be, but it does do that. So when Esther McBee was herself exposed as the DWP Secretary of State as having lied to a government official, she was forced to resign. And within a short time, within few minutes, Theresa May's government announced that Amber Rudd would become the new Secretary of State for the DWP. And it was shortly after her appointment as the Secretary of State of the DWP that Amber Rudd was asked to respond to the first report by Philip Alston about poverty, deprivation, and so on. And the statement that Amber Rudd issued or made was remarkable because of the first sentence. And the first sentence was not about the evidence or about the facts of what Alston was very modestly claiming was the case in Britain about the state causing poverty and deprivation, etc. Amber Rad should have referred to all the United Nations declarations, charters, conventions, agreements that the UK actively subscribes to as a signatory and has been subscribing to since the founding declarations of the United Nations organization itself. Instead of doing all of that, Amber Rad made a statement which is pathetic in its ignorance and its stupidity and its contempt against the people in low income, in hardship, in hunger in Britain. She said, I reject. And then she followed the details about Alston. Now, this is a woman that keeps appearing under the guise of being a moderate conservative, not an extremist conservative, not a right-wing conservative. Now, can you imagine? Can anyone with any common sense work this out? This issue of this magazine, whatever the kind of failings and inadequacies, I'm just referring to this strictly as a reference. The Amber Rad is referred to this one as having, wait for it, 9 separate jobs at the same time. She has got 9 jobs. Just try to work it out. What kind of energy does a single person have to have in order to them having really the time or the energy or the kind of inclination to do 9 jobs? 9 jobs simultaneously. That is to say, she is holding these posts all at the same time. She may attend to them different times of the week or month, but she is holding them all at the same time. And what kind of networking does that show she is benefiting from? I mean, to be able to get even one job is hard enough. And to get 9 jobs, think about the enterprise that she must maintain. Who are the people that are aiding and abetting her in getting hold of 9 jobs and then keeping them all paid? I'm going to find the Amber Rad piece here so that I can substantiate these remarks about her. Amber Rudd said that she rejects Philip Alston. Now, how many people in poverty, in low income, in homelessness have got even one job? Now, here is the piece about Amber Rudd. It's Rudd-faced. It's a play on the word to create the fanatical outcome result is red-faced. The trouble with using high office as a ticket to multiple juicy business appointments, that is how it's reading, is that before long, an embarrassing clash occurs. So it has proved for former cabinet member, reading again, so it has proved for former cabinet minister Amber Rudd, whose 9 jobs, the last I reported, include an environmental consultancy role with accountancy consultancy firm EY as the COP26 conference approaches, and chair of the advisory board of Norwegian energy group Equinor, formerly Statoil. Taking the latter post, Rudd said it was a company she had long admired. I mean, that is a stupid phrase to use, but that is what she's been quoted as saying. But EY, a reader of the Private Lie points out, says the Private Lie piece, is auditor of Equinor, checking not just its numbers, but also the sustainability report that is crucial to impressing its Norwegian government owner with its green transformation. This is all series of lies, they're doing. This presents a conflict of interest that would normally rule out a role at a Big Four bean counter for an audit client, cheerleader. So does Rudd keep the EY job? Of course. A spokesperson says she will have no involvement in the audit, and contractual provisions are also in place to prevent any conflict of interest. So that's all right then. That is the comment of the Private Lie piece. So 9 jobs and conflict of interest galore. I mean, she has got 9 jobs. Even if she gets a kind of fraction of the money that a full-time occupation of one of those jobs produces or brings, she will never go hungry. She will never be in arrears, rent arrears or whatever. And she never had, because prior to her contemptuous and contemptible dismissal of the Philip Alston report in 2018 and later, Amber Rudd had featured in a number of private eye issues as being dishonest, historically dishonest, and had been involved in various concoctions and lying about various businesses that she set up with her family. And when she dismissed the United Nations Envoy's report on poverty in the UK, Alston didn't come back, nor did the Guardian, nor did the Independent or anybody else who normally represents or presents a face, a front on their behalf to say that they are against poverty creation, low income, income disparity, and so on. None of them. And remember that time, 2018, the Labour Party in Parliament was being fronted by Jeremy Corbyn, allegedly as the leader. And as I have said about Corbyn is intellectually unfit. He is intellectually deficient and ignorant about most political things, despite the fact that he says he has been in politics for decades, which he has been. But he is deficient in the knowledge that he should have. Most of the things he doesn't know properly. And most of his utterances have been far below the standard and the level of rigor that there should have been. So when he was the kind of fronter in the parliament as the leader of the Labour Party and the opposition, this was the time when Amber Rudd issued the statement against the Philip Alston report. There was nothing. There was nothing that Corbyn actually said, nor had his relevant frontbench spokesperson on the subject to say that mattered, that even registered in the running order of the news programs of the news organizations. Running order is the numbers of schedule, what comes after what. And there was no running order run by any of the broadcasting organizations or by in the contents of Fleet Street, that registered any intelligent, rigorous, legal, constitutional, ethical, caring response by Jeremy Corbyn to the dismissal by the UK government of the report on poverty, etc., that had been published, compiled and published by the official United Nations envoy, Philip Alston. Now, this has been a dedicated discussion about poverty, hasn't it? So let's see what the time is and when we are going to do the next details of the role of the press, Fleet Street, in lying. So we shall check the time and we shall confirm what we are doing. So we are moving on to discussing the corruption in Tower Hamlets Council. Although the same kind of corruption took place in Newham, our main focus primarily is Tower Hamlets, and we shall recap. Anyone who doesn't know what we have broadcast and said in the past week, let's say, about the so-called referendum about the elected mayor post in Tower Hamlets. The referendum was staged. I'm saying that it wasn't a genuine referendum, that the referendum was stolen and robbed and hijacked by crooks crooks meaning crooks from all the so-called parties that claimed, dishonestly claimed, wrongly claimed that they were uniting in opposing the mayor post. If that is the case, how is it that the opponents or the opposite side to the argument for keeping the mayor got only about 18% of the votes? That is less than 1/5 of the votes. All the leaders either lied or they don't have any following among the people, among the voters. Now, both of those situations, scenarios, represent failures of democracy and the absence of integrity and ethics and morality on the part of the so-called political groups. But I think that this was a kind of well-planned device to give out the signal to the campaigners against the mayor system that everything is okay and the mayor system will be gone. So you don't have to do any campaigning. This is exactly what they did in 2010. As I have said many times, the Labour Group on Terms Council was misrepresented by Abbasuddin alias Helal, who claimed to be, during 2010, campaigning against the mayor system. But it became very clear later that Abbasuddin alias Helal was completely being dishonest and two-faced. While he was on the face appearing to be against the mayor system, on private kind of levels, he was approaching members of the Labour Party in Tower Hamlets and assuring them that he would be a candidate and they should vote for him as the candidate to be the candidate of choice of the Labour Party for the post of the mayor. So therefore, the no vote was 39%, let's say, in 2010. This time it has completely disappeared almost, 18%. And this was followed by several weeks of appearances on online shows by the likes, including probably Abbasuddin alias Halal, apparently saying that they are against the mayor system. They were not. And I'll tell you why. Because more than a year ago, in fact, even during 2018, I have been talking to people in the Labour Party in Tower Hamlets about the need to collect signatures for a proper constitutional procedural petition to force a referendum on the question of the mayor post at the expense of Tower Hamlets. And several people have told me in that time that they were already collecting signatures. Within that period, whenever the appropriate procedurally permitted time was. And as late as June last year, just 11 months ago, on live program, not this channel, but another channel, one person claimed to have already collected thousands, not hundreds, thousands of signatures. Now, whatever the number of signatures required by the procedure depending on the actual registered numbers of people resident in the borough. It was repeatedly asserted that significant numbers of signatures had been collected. That meant that anyone hearing that kind of statement would have thought, well, we don't need to go out of the way to collect more signatures because there have been already enough signatures available. Now, if that was the case, then what happened to those signatures? And who stopped those signatures being formally submitted to the persons responsible in the council as post holders that were to process these signed petition, whatever the petition said? That is something that is a clear proof that sabotage was done again this year. And then the various sources have said that the official Labour Party in Tower Hamlets, the official Conservative Party in Tower Hamlets, the official Lib Dems, although it has only two kind of very fragilely posted in place councillors, that all of them were against the mayor system. So how did they manage to lose so many votes to the pro-mayor post side? Sabotage has been happening because these ones wanted to lull false reassurance or false assurance to the campaigners against the mayor system that it will be gone because all the parties are united against the mayor system. And that unity was like Abbasuddin alias Halal behaving in the way he did in 2010. Two-faced. Now, the reason why it is concerning, personally, it is not a matter that my career or opportunities depend on it. It doesn't, because I have actively and conscientiously been campaigning for a very long time against having a post in a government or in any number of governments and in any number of organizations. I gave up a job as a civil servant, as they say, in the Home Office in the 70s in this country on an issue of morality and constitutionality. And the woman who was kind of in charge of the interview and process thanked me for being so principled. I said, I can't answer your question because she was asking me a question. I had no need to hide the answer. But on a principle, I refused to answer that question, if it makes sense. And that was in the 70s. And I said, no, I will not answer that. And I said, it's a matter of principle to me. And she thanked me for being so honest. Well, I am honest. That is my identity. Now, so when I say that the mayor system should go, it's not because I want to be mayor or I want to be something else, whatever. It is not about my career. It's about the community. It's about the people. It's about the role of the council in Tower Hamlets that has disappeared now. The council has been kind of destroyed now. There is no council. I shall say this again. Tower Hamlets Council has been abolished by the imposition of this post of mayor. And the Tower Hamlets Council is not the only council that has been abolished. It's Niwam Council as well. And the implication of that, we have already explained before, but the implication of that abolition of the council is that the quality and the quantity, the fact and the standard of service are both almost vanished and abolished as well. The people who are affected overwhelmingly in demography, in terms of the numbers of people living in Tower Hamlets, the people who are affected adversely, that is, who are going to lose a lot of their rights, are going to be a large number of Bangladeshis and other people from other backgrounds, from other countries, or who originate from African backgrounds and other parts of Asia are going to lose out. It's not a one-off shopping experience. It's a comprehensive list of every aspect of life and existence in the community. Because crooks and thieves have taken over Tower Hamlets Council and removed and hijacked democracy and have destroyed it, buried the democracy in Tower Hamlets. What they're doing, they have created a phantom replacement. And it's being a phantom, it is not the real thing. And the phantom is currently called John Biggs. And whether it is Biggs or somebody else who occupies that post, doesn't matter who the individual is. The community's connection with a structure of local say will be totally disposed of, abolished, scrapped, ended. And so therefore, there has to be democracy and there has to be a council answerable to the community. And so therefore, what we are doing, we are working on the details of the activities that we shall be initiating to force the scrapping of this mayor post. And we shall be keeping viewers updated on this issue. And we shall be talking about the four schoolgirls in later edition or editions, and we shall be covering the rest of the papers in later editions. This is coming to just over an hour, I think now. What is the time? 15:20. If we start at 15:20, then this one is 1700 hours now. So 15:20 and 16:20 was 1 hour. So it's just 1 hour and 40 minutes, is it? Let's see. This is 1700, so